Thanks so much, Kathy, and welcome everyone to today's presentation. I'm excited to introduce Resa Dimino, who is a managing principal with RRS, a sustainability and materials management consulting firm, and a partner at Signal Fire Group, a subsidiary of RRS, focused on supporting governments and businesses to navigate policy and regulation to move toward a circular economy. Resa has over 30 years of experience in waste reduction, recycling, product stewardship, and environmental economic development. She has held roles in the recycling industry, trade groups, and the public sector with We Recycle, NAPCOR, and the New York State DEC. As of late, she has managed and directed multiple recycling supply chain assessments, infrastructure gap analysis, EPR modeling, and policy development projects. Resa recently led and participated in projects supporting the development of carpet EPR in New York, the study of PET thermoform recycling costs and material flows, and mapped the infrastructure and material flow of plastics in the US and Canada. I'm not sure how she found the time, but she joined us on campus last week for the Center of Sustainable Materials Management Symposium, and we're so delighted to have her back today for our first Professionals in Sustainability webinar series of the year. Without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Resa.
Thank you for the nice introduction, and I'm excited to talk to y'all today. And yeah, very happy to have you all today and talk a little bit. It was interesting to prepare for this. I talk to people a lot, but I don't always talk about myself, so it's slightly uncomfortable situation for me, but we'll working from my phone because I think that'll be a little bit more reliable. Can you hear me better now? Yes. Yep. All right, great. Apologies for the technical difficulties, folks. I was just saying it's interesting. It was interesting for me preparing for this talk because I don't talk about myself very often. So a little bit uncomfortable, but we'll do our best. Thanks for having me today. I'm very excited to talk to y'all. And hope we can get some time for a conversation as we go through this. So if you would go to the first slide. In thinking about preparing for this and talking about my career path, it's very clear that the path has been windy, and if you sort of do some reading on careers, it's interesting. You can plan your career out, and you can make those paths forward, or you can take an approach like I did, which is, I feel like I need to make a move now. What's the most interesting thing happening around me that I could do? Where am I going to learn the most? Where am I going to be working with people who I really want to learn from, and that kind of thing? And that's really how I've developed. I liked this quote from Sylvia Matthews Burwell, who is the current president, I think, of American University, former Health and Human Services commissioner and or secretary, rather, that she's never thought about a career path, an unusual approach, and I've sort of been that way too. So I'll tell you a little bit about kind of my history. So I graduated from Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania in 1990. Back then we didn't have degrees in sustainability. We didn't even have very frequently degrees in environmental studies or environmental science. So what I graduated with was a bachelor's in American Studies, political science minor, and an environmental studies certificate, which was sort of as far as we could go within our programs at that time. I was fortunate to work with a brilliant professor there, Candy Wilderman, and another, Michael Hyman, who were just building the environmental studies and environmental sciences department there. And about 2 weeks before I graduated college, Michael, the professor, handed me this job announcement for a job at an environmental organization in Washington, D.C. called Environmental Action, was the organization that founded the first Earth Day. And they were looking for an outreach coordinator to work in their solid waste alternatives project. So he handed me this job announcement. He said, I think this would be a great job for you. And I said, that sounds interesting. So I applied and was able to get that job. And in 1990, that was just after kind of the garbage barge had gone around the world. Folks are familiar with that story, but Islip, the town of Islip, Long Island, had waste to dispose of, nowhere to dispose of it. It traveled on a barge as far as I think Central America, and then wound up coming back and going to a waste to energy facility in New York. But it drew a lot of attention to the garbage crisis and how much waste we were generating, and really created the first policy push around recycling, getting recycling going. So in 1990, states were passing laws, setting recycling goals, requiring municipal recycling, things like that. New York, I believe, passed our law in 1988. So I was working with this national nonprofit, helping people at the local and state level who were trying to get recycling policies enacted. And, it was before the internet was widely used and that sort of thing. So we actually made what we called fact packets, which were photocopies of articles of what was going on in different states and communities to share information with people so folks would know what was going on. And we connected people who were working on similar issues in different parts of the country. So that was a really interesting way to enter the field back then, and set me on an interesting path that and after working on policy and connecting these interesting people for a few years, I thought, I would really like to get a little bit more on the ground understanding of how recycling actually works. And so I moved to New York and worked for an organization called Bronx 2000, which was a nonprofit community development organization in the Bronx that developed recycling-based businesses as essentially an economic development and jobs projects for folks in the Bronx. It was sort of, we need businesses here, we need jobs here. What materials do we have locally that we could use to fuel that? Recycled materials were key to that. So I worked in that recycling-related business for a number of years, and really got that on the ground knowledge. And throughout my career, I've kind of followed that pattern of working kind of at the policy level, on the higher sort of policy frame, and then on the operational side. So sort of bringing a policy understanding and context to operational work, and an operational grounding to policy discussions. So as I was working in the Bronx on recycling related issues, I got sort of exposed to a variety of different issues and that were happening in the Bronx, and made the determination to kind of stay local and not be as focused on recycling as a career for a little while. So I continued to, as a volunteer, serve on and chair the Bronx Solid Waste Advisory Board, and nationally the Grassroots Recycling Network. And I spent some time professionally working for the Bronx Borough President's Office, which the planning office, which dealt with environmental issues, planning reviews, that sort of thing, and then worked for the Bronx River Alliance doing ecological restoration, greenway development, and other things. So I kept my toes in recycling through volunteer work, but again, sort of not following a very direct career trajectory, but looking at what are the opportunities I have here, and who are the interesting people I want to work with, and what are they doing? And at that time, the Bronx River Alliance was really trailblazing in terms of engaging community and restoration and development and realigning public resources to meet community needs and that sort of thing. So did that for a while, and then got the opportunity to move up to work in state government at New York State DEC. And this was when the Spitzer administration was coming in, and after 12 years of a Republican administration that was not super focused on environmental protection and environmental restoration. There was a lot of attention on bringing in some new energy into the agency and addressing some issues that had been developed for many years, including recycling. So I was brought into what was then known as the policy office at DEC, and we had a number of us that specialized in different issues, and I was the waste policy person. So in that context, I helped to develop the Beyond Waste Plan, which sort of set the stage for the agency's refocusing on reduction and reuse and recycling, and also helped to negotiate and develop the electronics recycling, electronics extended producer responsibility legislation. So those were the two major things. We did a lot in that time at DEC, but the administration was changing and things were moving on, and I got an opportunity to step into operations again. And so I left DEC to work for a recycling company that was actually implementing the e-waste law that I helped to craft, and a company, We Recycle, also based in New York and in New Rochelle, or Mount Vernon rather, and did some work actually working with communities around New York State and Connecticut and Pennsylvania, who were all rolling out electronic CPR programs at the time to set up electronics collection programs and that sort of thing. So that was really great experience. It was a tough job on a variety of levels. So we did a pretty brief stint there, but learned a lot. And then decided to move into some independent consulting, working on my own, but really with a couple of core clients. So it was at this stage that I really got deep into plastic packaging recycling, working with NAPCOR, the trade association for the PET packaging industry, on recycling of PET bottles and PET thermoforms. And then also working for the Product Stewardship Institute. So I should have mentioned that while I was at DEC and we were putting together the Beyond Waste Plan, we really began to focus on extended producer responsibility and product stewardship as key policy tools for the state. I helped to organize the New York Product Stewardship Council, which is essentially formed predominantly of local governments, but also other stakeholders looking to really move extended producer responsibility policy as a key part of the recycling and waste management strategy in New York. And so I worked with the Product Stewardship Institute also during that independent consulting period. And then I sort of thought, I'd like to do bigger projects. I'd like to do more impactful projects, and I am somewhat limited, working as an independent consultant. And so I wanted to join a larger team. And at that point, again, following the go to the place where the interesting people are doing interesting work, I joined the team at RRS, which was really starting to forge a new framework for how we support both public sector and private sector entities and moving towards sustainable materials management and circularity. So I think that is the story of my pathway. I don't know, Kathy, if we want to stop and take questions here, or if I should just go right into the RRS description.
Folks are welcome to put any questions they have in the chat, or if someone does want to unmute and ask, can pause briefly. I think we'll have time at the end too, so I would say let's continue. Thanks.
Okay. So, RS is a mission-driven recycling specific consultancy. We've been around about 35 years, really focused on circularity. In the early days, we were founded by some of the folks who started one of the first curbside recycling programs in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We started one of the first material recovery facilities or recycling sorting facilities. And since that time, we've sort of maintained a place on the cutting edge of recycling program and processing capabilities. And so have grown over time from a pretty small Midwestern based consultancy working predominantly with local governments to now a national and international practice that really focuses on the full supply chain, the 6 elements of recycling that you see noted here on the slide. We really focus on helping clients understand the realities and practice of moving towards sustainability and kind of what that entails. And again, bringing a really skilled team that has a variety of backgrounds and skills that we bring to the table. Next slide. So we are organized in a number of teams, which we refer to as hubs, and we're not a very siloed organization. We're kind of what you call a matrix organization in that we have different teams in which our folks are organized, but we do cross-functional work all of the time. So I, as a managing principal at RRS, I manage the markets and infrastructure team. So my team includes mostly engineers, but also some generalists like myself that focus on markets, on supply chains, and really more of the sort of operational end of the recycling collection, processing, and market system. We have a team that works on corporate sustainability. So these folks focus on our corporate clientele. As I mentioned, we started out really focused on the community side, and you can see we still have a very strong and vibrant sustainable communities program. But about 15 years ago, as the interest in corporate sustainability and circularity kind of increased over time, we've developed a robust corporate sustainability practice. It often draws on our markets team, our data team, our communications team, but really focuses on delivering those services to corporate clients. And then, we have a communications team. We have Signal Fire, which is our policy subsidiary. I'm a managing partner in that entity. And then it all centers around our data core. We are very data driven. We're very science based. And so the data core is a team kind of at the center of our work that manages our information and our data around materials, markets, infrastructure, and sustainability. Next slide. So one of the things that makes RS, I think, unique in the consulting space is, we do a lot of the core things that consultants do in terms of analytics and comms and that kind of thing. But we bring a really a very solid base of experience in programs and in operations. So most of our staff have at one point in their careers worked either for a local government or in the waste recycling or resource conservation in a business of some sort around waste recycling and resource conservation. So we're not we're not the, your typical management consulting firm in that way. We're really pretty grounded in an operational understanding, but we do have a broad base of skills, as you see there. We do work in organics as well as in materials recovery. We do economics, we do analytics. We do hazardous materials, we do engineering, and of course, and operations and materials flow and that kind of stuff as well. Next slide. So this gives you a sense of the breadth of the work that we do in our various focus areas here. We do, as I mentioned, we have a corporate sustainability practice. A lot of that work is around packaging. We have a true cycle process, which is essentially we can evaluate a package and sort of grade it on its recyclability at various stages in terms of design, sortability, marketability, that sort of thing. We do packaging strategy. So, these companies who want to move to a fully recyclable portfolio, what does that mean? How do they do that? And that kind of thing. We do scorecard certifications and that kind of stuff. In terms of research, we do a lot of really interesting research. Some is client specific and doesn't see the light of the day, but we also do collaborative projects where we bring together a variety of entities who all want to solve the same problem or address the same research question, bring those resources together, and then define a research process and project with those folks. So that's one of the reasons why I came to RRS, was to have the flexibility to really try to address some of the bigger problems in the recycling industry and have the ability to do things like develop some of these collaborative projects, looking at things like, how are we going to recycle flexible film packaging? Can we collect it in a MRF? What does that entail? What are the challenges in doing that? How are we going to improve the recycling of non-bottle PET or PET clamshells? How are we going to get those to markets? That kind of thing. And that takes a variety of different different or different tracks, depending on kind of the question being asked. We also do things like LCA, greenhouse gas modeling and impacts. We do material flow testing, which is kind of interesting, RFID technology to put a package into a facility and see, does it go where you want it to go? Does it flow to the proper end market and that kind of thing? And then in terms of state level and public sector research, we do things like gap analyses, which are kind of similar to the needs assessment we're helping New York put together right now, which is sort of, here's where we are now, here's where we want to go. What's the gap? How do we get there? And how do we fill that gap to get our systems and our programs performing where we want them to be? And then in terms of waste and recycling, a whole variety of different kinds of projects around things as sort of simple as direct as designing a MRF or helping out in MRF operations, to zero waste planning for a community or a company, and that sort of thing, circularity related planning and questions. And then on the organic side, we have a variety of different kinds of projects looking at how to develop food waste programs, how to develop organics infrastructure, how do you develop the supply chain, and that kind of thing. Next slide. So I mentioned a bit, we have a pretty broad variety of clients out there. We do a lot of work with governments, local and state governments, as well as a fair amount of work with brands and producers and manufacturers, a lot of work with trade groups, some with foundations and NGOs, packaging industry, retailer, haulers, and recyclers. So really everybody engaged in the supply chain, we work with at some level or another. Next slide. So also wanted to mention, we do have a policy subsidiary, which I am a partner in, called the Signal Fire Group. We formed about 2 years ago, really recognizing a significant uptick in interest and activity around recycling related policy and extended producer responsibility in particular. And so we are working with a variety of different clients, including governments, NGOs, private companies, trade groups, really helping them to understand the policy landscape and how they can influence it. And if they can influence it, what do they want to ask for? So, you know, what policy provisions are really going to support recycling business moving forward? So that sort of thing. We can also do market assessment, strategy development, pilot programs, and that sort of thing. One example of the Signal Fire Group's work is we worked with carpet recyclers to develop and enact the carpet extended producer responsibility law that was passed in New York a couple of years ago, now coming into effect a couple of years down the road. And so that was an example where, you know, we have carpet recyclers, they want to build their business. They're, you know, they have a viable business, but they don't, there's not enough money in the system to cover the cost of collection and processing. So they need extended producer responsibility to make their business work and to be able to recover all of this valuable material from carpets and get it to end markets. So we worked with them to develop a policy that would support them in that way, and would support New York in helping to divert that material, reduce the cost of handling that material, and get it to an end market. So that's an example of the kind of work we're doing with Signal Fire around the country. And I think does that take us to the end? Yeah. So I hope folks have questions, would love to have some conversation.
Yeah, we are open for questions. Brandon is, thank you, first of all, Resa, very much for your presentation. And Brandon was going to facilitate some questions. I actually, because I have your presentation in front of me that you had emailed, just am looking back at your slide with what we do and just thought it very interesting research and analysis column, almost between life cycle assessment, market landscape studies, and GIS economic feasibility. Sounds a lot like sustainability management curriculum. So yes, just wanted to point that out for our students that are in the audience, if that looked familiar to them too. But folks, yeah, please jump in through the chat if you want to send one direct to Brandon, myself, or just unmute. I believe everyone can unmute themselves if they want.
Should be able to unmute yourself if you want. Resa, while people are thinking, I have a question about, you know, when you're talking about the different teams in the RS test, like how big is like one of those teams, and how many different people, you know, bringing different sort of areas of expertise are working together on these types of projects?
Yeah, so RS as a whole is, I think we're near 70 people right now, and we're split up essentially on 5 teams, so that gives you a size, a rough idea of size. I think we did some work, and you've probably seen this other places too, but the sort of optimal team size is somewhere around 8 to 10, so that's kind of where we try to keep, where some of our teams are up to about 12. And so, the teams are really focused on, we view the team as kind of a homeroom. And so it's where, your sort of supervisory structure is. It's where, we push out sort of administrative information and that kind of thing. But when we work on projects, we work on projects with people from a variety of different teams. And so my team in particular, like the markets and infrastructure team, we work with people who are in the community side, because sometimes communities need information on where to market materials and how those materials are handled, or they operate their own facilities and programs and need that market and infrastructure approach. And the same is true with the corporate side. So we provide essentially services across the board. So the team for a particular project can vary pretty dramatically from one to the next. We do have kind of groups, sort of informal groups. So I do a lot of work on plastic recycling, and there's probably like 5 or 6 of us within the company who do a lot of work on plastic. So we coordinate on some issues, and then we often will have the same team of folks who know the plastics work and work integrally together. But we really see project teams for particular projects as separate from our kind of homeroom teams, if that makes sense. And that makes for kind of a good workplace dynamic, because we're often getting to shift around who we're working with. We get exposed to different folks in the company, and I get to understand kind of what folks bring to the table.
I think there's a question that kind of relates to this posted in the chat, and then Nicole, I see your hand up too. Mentioning that not siloed, how do you manage the effective communication across those departments or groups?
Yeah, so we have every team meets once a week, and we have an administrative part of that meeting. So our central management pushes out basically a slide deck every week that is shared with each of the teams. And then each of the teams also has some focus on performance criteria that they go over every week. So each team meets once a week and looks at project issues, performance issues, and then administrative issues that come through the central team, which we call Value Hub. And then once a month, we have full staff meetings, which involve everybody in the company. And so that's where larger issues come to play. If we have new policies or new things coming down the pike, we push those out through the monthly staff meeting. And then also we have sort of sharing opportunities on those meetings. So if someone has done a big project or a big report, they'll share that at a staff meeting, so everyone in the company is aware of that research that we did or that report that we put out, and knows kind of who did it and how to get that information for a future project.
Awesome. Thank you. Nicole, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you so much. And Resa, thank you so much for your presentation. It's so good to hear about this side of things. I mean, at least for myself, I teach about it all the time, but you're not in it sometimes. So getting that perspective is wonderful. So I do have a question, just as a little bit of background on what prompted this question. I have a group of students who are working basically on a consulting project for Goodwill of Western New York this semester. And we had the CEO, the new CEO, who came in, and he was kind of discussing how when the company went through such changes, revenues are growing and all of these wonderful things. And one of the students, asked a question and said, well, how did you do this? This looks amazing, all around change. And he's like, COVID. COVID is the only reason we could make these changes, because otherwise it's very hard, right, to make company-wide changes. So my question is, I wonder, with, of course, related to COVID, have you seen more companies maybe coming in, because we hear about supply chain disruptions and maybe some push to come back to the States. Do you see more companies coming in as they're kind of changing their way of doing business to get more kind of help in, doing business sustainably, or was there a noticeable shift that you've noticed basically post-COVID with these companies?
Yeah, and I think that the supply chain security is definitely a factor in folks trying to understand how to source materials domestically and look at recycled materials and that sort of thing. That's definitely been a factor. We've also seen some pressures on some of the companies with inflationary factors and COVID, where we're seeing a lot of companies cutting back on their sustainability divisions, which in a lot of ways is terrible in terms of our work. That it is sometimes, better for us in that they rely on consultants on a greater level if they don't have the internal capabilities. But yeah, I think on the whole, that's been a pretty negative trend. So we're, sort of contrary to what you see in terms of corporate goals and targets around sustainability, and those sort of really aggressive targets, they're pulling back for sure on the staffing in those areas. And I think the ongoing tension around increased cost and what's the real importance of meeting those targets when it comes to things that cost more. And how do you balance those things in a tight economy? It gets harder. And so that's definitely been a factor. We definitely saw changes in the packaging stream as a result of COVID that have lasted, in terms of looking at material flows. The increase in things shifting to online sales has certainly maintained. And so a lot more corrugated cardboard in the residential recycling stream, for example, a lot more takeout food packaging than you might have seen before. So there's lots of changes in that way that the sort of system is working to resolve and respond. I don't know if that actually addresses your question exactly, but.
No, perfect. Thank you so much.
Sue, I can see your hand up, and then I'm going to stop the share just so I can see everybody a little more easy. There we go.
Great. Thank you, Resa. Resa knows I am a longtime listener and fan. So this is
Hi,
very
Sue. I almost called you out a minute ago, and the challenges of balancing when things cost more, but you need to meet the sustainability goals. I know you live in that space every day.
Yes. And again, thank you for this presentation. I want to learn a little bit more about, like, in terms of circularity, what do you find is worth pouring your energy, your excitement into? I guess, like, what do you think is the most impactful aspect of circularity, or your favorite part that you think can make that most impact?
So, it's not actually the thing that we need to focus on most is getting people to recycle more, getting better recycling collection programs, and getting better recycling collection services, and getting more and better systems in place. Because I think, the big challenge to circularity right now is the supply of circular materials and the amount of material that we're sending to landfills and waste to energy facilities. And we just, need to do better. We've not improved in decades, and we need to do better. So that's where I find myself focusing a lot of my energy. And I think, there's serious challenges in some of the things I like to sort of think about in my ample spare time, is like, what are the challenges of circularity versus sustainable materials management? Those are not the same thing. I think people view them as one of the same, and they're not necessarily. What circular is not always going to be the best from an SMM perspective. And so which pathway is right, and in which context? And sort of my favorite example of this is compostable packaging, right? Makes no sense to have compostable packaging if you don't have composting or compostable collection available to you, or if the compost facility your stuff is going to isn't capable of handling that kind of material, yet people still feel really good about compostable packaging. And so those kinds of conversations, I feel like we really need to be having. And does that make sense?
Oh yes, now I'm going to contemplate those questions too myself. So yeah, any other Resa questions floating in your head, always feel free to share.
Absolutely.
I had a question come in direct to me, Resa.
Okay.
I think this is more referencing like RSS big picture.
Mhm.
Do you seek out the clients, or I mean, does the company seek out the clients, or do the clients seek out you? And what does that process look like?
It's a combination for sure. We get about, I think it's somewhere upwards of 60%, 60 or 70% of our work is repeat clients or referrals. So as a consultant, the best marketing you can do is actually doing good work and delivering good products and having happy clients, because happy clients come back and happy clients tell other people about you. So most of our work comes in that way, but we do go out and solicit work as well. Often in the public sector and in some private sector clients, there's RFP processes. So someone will issue an RFP for a study they want done, or and so we'll respond to those and compete for work in certain instances. And so that's an example of how we would go out and seek work. And then there's the whole range of projects that we kind of develop because we think they need to exist. So for example, this PET thermoform project is just something that I really wanted to see done. And I knew a lot of people wanted to see done and nobody was taking leadership on it. So we stepped in and brought together the funders and defined the research agenda and move that forward. So it's kind of a combination of those things.
Thank you. Question in the chat from Katrina. What do you see as the top 3 skills someone working in the field of sustainability today needs today?
So I think, one of the things I've found most useful, and of course, my background is not trained in sustainability, but the sort of the ability to think critically and sort of challenge basic assumptions is key. And that translates across the board. I think in terms of marketability, as you go out there, people are looking for strong data and analytics, strong research skills, understanding of material characteristics, supply chains. But I think sort of looking at the high level, it's critical thinking, it's systems thinking, and always the ability to work in a team and and to contribute in a team environment is the most important thing.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any more questions as we're kind of coming towards the end of things here?
I'm always good for another, but I want to make space for other people too.
Sue and I could talk all day.
We really could. Anyone else before I ask another? Okay. This one is not dense materials management. And this is not me thinking this is where my life will go, but I've always been really impressed with people who can kind of take the leap to independent consulting. So it looks like you did that at some point. I would just love to hear whatever you'd like to share about that. Like, it just seems terrifying. How do you how do you get the gumption to do that? How do you find clients? It just seems like such a, like, you've worked government, you've worked independent, you're now leading a large team. So it's just a really interesting breadth of experience, but that one I don't know much about. So I would just love to learn anything you want to share.
Yeah, so I've done I didn't mention that I did independently consult for a brief period when I was in the Bronx as well. And in both of those instances, it was a situation of wasn't a great time in the industry. I knew I wanted to be, doing certain kinds of work, but there weren't great full-time jobs out there for what I was looking for. And at that point, geography used to matter. It doesn't matter anymore, but and so there were those kinds of factors, and it was like, well, if I want to do what I want to do, this is going to be how I'm going to have to do it. And in order to make it work, I before sort of hanging out my own shingle, I did lock in my first client. So in the most recent time, that I was working at the electronics recycler, I knew that wasn't a long-term home for me. So I started calling around and talking to people, and the folks at NAPCOR needed someone to bring them into the policy realm. And that was interesting work to me. I hadn't worked on policy from an industry perspective before, and they would basically provide me with a contract that would cover my basic costs, right? So I knew if I had them for a kind of longish term contract, that I could then build other clients around it, and I would have enough security to let my job go. And so that's what I did. They were my core client. I then added the Product Stewardship Institute. I did a variety of other small projects, but I always knew that I could kind of pay my bills based on what I was getting from that core client. So that was necessary. And the same thing happened the time before. There, I had one sort of core project that allowed me to make the leap. And then could sort of build in other projects around it. I think the fact that I have worked in a lot of different areas and have developed networks over the years really helped, because people know me. So when I would call around and be like, hey, I'm consulting now, they'd be like, oh, can you help us on this? Can you help on that? So there were opportunities like that came along. But as I said, ultimately, after a while, it's kind of limiting to work on your own. And I wanted to be able to do things that were more impactful. And so joining a larger team allowed me to do that. We have a bunch of folks who can do kind of hardcore analytics and nice mapping and all of those things, which I've come to realize at this stage of my career, it's really important for people to understand, it's important to learn and move things forward, but it's important that other people understand it as well. And in order to do that, you have to be able to really, really create that database, visualize that data for people, and help them through the process. And the team at RS allows me to do that in a way I could never do by myself.
Thank you so much, Resa. I think we are going to wrap up today's presentation. So just wanted to appreciate everyone for taking the time to be here with us. And I will, as I said, send slides, recording link, things like that. And of course, I always ask Resa for any, or I ask all of our presenters for any internship or other type opportunities or networking suggestions that I could include in that follow-up email too. So please be on the look for that. And
Sure.
Yeah, so thank you all. We will be back mid-October, October 18th, with a second in this fall series. Ben Cullum, who's an ESF grad, but now works as sustainability and energy manager for a real estate management company in New York City. So looking forward to hearing his story too. But Resa, I really appreciate just your path and you doing what you do and being just really down in the trenches in terms of your knowledge of this world of recycling, but also connecting it. I think I kind of liked your generalist term. So I appreciate that and how you
Thanks
approach
so
that.
much. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that's important to keep in mind. You don't have to be super specialized. You don't have to be a data scientist or, those kinds of things to contribute in an impactful way. And so just want to make sure people take that home.
Mhm. Excellent. All right. Well, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. And thank you again. We'll be in touch.
Take care, everyone.